The horde of the Ghibellines. The Ghibellines eat, as is well known, nothing less good than man. Their evil tower is joined to terra cognita, to the lands we know, by a bridge. Their hoard is beyond reason. Avarice has no use for it. They have a separate cellar for emeralds, and a separate cellar for sapphires. They have filled a hole with gold, and dig it up when they need it. And the only use that is known for their ridiculous wealth is to attract to their larder a continual supply of food. In times of famine they have even been known to scatter rubies abroad, a little trail of them to some city of man, and sure enough, their larders would soon be full again. Their tower stands on the other side of that river known to Homer, Horus Oceanoio, as he called it, which surrounds the world. And where the river is narrow and fordable, the tower was built by the Ghibellines' gluttonous sires, for they liked to see burglars rowing easily to their steps. Some nourishment that common soil has not, the huge trees drained there with their colossal roots from both banks of the river. There the Ghibellines lived and discreditably fed. Alderic, Knight of the Order of the City and the Assault, hereditary guardian of the king's peace of mind, a man not unremembered among makers of myth, pondered so long upon the Ghibellines' hoard that by now he deemed it his. Alas that I should say of so perilous a venture, undertaken at dead of night by a valorous man, that its motive was sheer avarice. Yet upon avarice only the Ghibellines relied to keep their larders full, and once in every 100 years sent spies into the cities of men to see how avarice did, and always the spies returned again to the tower saying that all was well. It may be thought that, as the years went on, and men came by fearful ends on that tower's wall, fewer and fewer would come to the Ghibellines' table, but the Ghibellines found otherwise. Not in the folly and frivolity of his youth did Alderic come to the tower, but he studied carefully for several years the manner in which burglars met their doom when they went in search of the treasure that he considered his. In every case they had entered by the door. He consulted those who gave advice on this quest. He noted every detail and cheerfully paid their fees, and determined to do nothing that they advised, for what were their clients now? No more than examples of the savory art, and mere half-forgotten memories of a meal, and many, perhaps, no longer even that. These were the requisites for the quest that these men used to advise: a horse, a boat, mail armor, and at least 3 men-at-arms. Some said, "Blow the horn at the tower door." Others said, "Do not touch it." Alderic thus decided he would take no horse down to the river's edge. He would not row along it in a boat, and he would go alone and by way of the forest unpassable. How pass, you may say, the unpassable? This was his plan. There was a dragon he knew of, who, if peasants' prayers are heeded, deserved to die. Not alone because of the number of maidens he cruelly slew, but because he was bad for the crops. He ravaged the very land, and was the bane of a dukedom. Now Alderic determined to go up against him, so he took horse and spear, and pricked till he met the dragon. And the dragon came out against him, breathing bitter smoke. And to him Alderic shouted, "Hath foul dragon ever slain true knight?" And well the dragon knew that this had never been, and he hung his head and was silent, for he was glutted with blood. "Then," said the knight, "if thou wouldst ever taste maiden's blood again, thou shalt be my trusty steed, and if not, by this spear there shall befall thee all that the troubadours tell of the dooms of thy breed." And the dragon did not open his ravening mouth, nor rush upon the knight, breathing out fire, for well he knew the fate of those that did these things. But he consented to the terms imposed, and swore to the knight to become his trusty steed. It was on a saddle upon this dragon's back that Alderic afterwards sailed above the unpassable forest, even above the tops of those measureless trees, children of wonder. But first he pondered that subtle plan of his, which was more profound than merely to avoid all that had been done before. And he commanded a blacksmith, and the blacksmith made him a pickaxe. Now there was great rejoicing at the rumor of Alderic's quest, for all folk knew that he was a cautious man, and they deemed that he would succeed and enrich the world, and they rubbed their hands in the cities at the thought of largesse. And there was joy among all men in Alderic's country, except perchance among the lenders of money, who feared they would soon be paid. And there was rejoicing also because men hoped that when the Ghibellines were robbed of their hoard, they would shatter their high-built bridge, and break the golden chains that bound them to the world, and drift back, they and their tower, to the moon, from which they had come and to which they rightly belonged. There was little love for the Ghibellines, though all men envied their hoard. So they all cheered that day when he mounted his dragon, as though he was already a conqueror. And what pleased them more than the good that they hoped he would do to the world was that he scattered gold as he rode away, for he would not need it, he said, if he found the Ghibellines' hoard, and he would not need it more if he smoked on the Ghibellines' table. When they heard that he had rejected the advice of those that gave it, some said that the knight was mad, and others said he was greater than those what gave the advice, but none appreciated the worth of his plan. He reasoned thus: for centuries men had been well advised, and had gone by the cleverest way, while the Ghibellines came to expect them to come by boat, and to look for them at the door whenever their larder was empty, even as a man looketh for a snipe in a marsh. But how, said Alderic, if a snipe should sit in the top of a tree, and would men find him there? Assuredly never. So Alderic decided to swim the river, and not to go by the door, but to pick his way into the tower through the stone. Moreover, it was in his mind to work below the level of the ocean, the river, as Homer knew, that girdles the world, so that as soon as he made a hole in the wall, the water should pour in, confounding the Ghibellines, and flooding the cellars, rumored to be 20 feet in depth, and therein he would dive for emeralds, as a diver dives for pearls. And on the day that I tell of, he galloped away from his home, scattering largesse of gold, as I have said, and passed through many kingdoms, the dragon snapping at maidens as he went, but being unable to eat them because of the bit in his mouth, and earning no gentler reward than a spur thrust where he was softest. And so they came to the swart arboreal precipice of the impassable forest. The dragon rose at it with a rattle of wings. Many a farmer near the edge of the worlds saw him up there where yet the twilight lingered, a faint black wavering line, and mistaking him for a row of geese going inland from the ocean, went into their houses cheerily, rubbing their hands, and saying that winter was coming, and that we should soon have snow. Soon, even there the twilight faded away, and when they descended at the edge of the world, it was night and the moon was shining. Ocean, the ancient river, narrow and shallow there, flowed by and made no murmur. Whether the Ghibellines banqueted, or whether they watched by the door, they also made no murmur. And Alderic dismounted, and took his armor off, and saying one prayer to his lady, swam with his pickaxe. He did not part from his sword, for fear that he meet with a Ghibelline. Landed the other side, he began to work at once, and all went well with him. Nothing put out its head from any window, and all were lighted so that nothing within could see him in the dark. The blows of his pickaxe were dulled in the deep walls. All night he worked. No sound came to molest him, and at dawn the last rock swerved and tumbled inwards, and the river poured in after. Then Alderic took a stone, and went to the bottom step, and hurled the stone at the door. He heard the echoes roll into the tower. Then he ran back and dived through the hole in the wall. He was in the emerald cellar. There was no light in the lofty vault above him, but, diving through 20 feet of water, he felt the floor all rough with emeralds, and open coffers full of them. By a faint ray of the moon, he saw that the water was green with them, and easily filling a satchel, he rose again to the surface. And there were the Ghibellines waist deep in the water with torches in their hands, and without saying a word or even smiling, they neatly hanged him on the outer wall, and the tale is one of those that have not a happy ending. How Knuth would have practiced his art upon the knolls. Despite the advertisements of rival firms, it is probable that every tradesman knows that nobody in business at the present time has a position equal to that of Mr. Knuth. To those outside the magic circle of business, his name is scarcely known. He does not need to advertise. He is consummate. He is superior even to modern competition, and, whatever claims they boast, his rivals know it. His terms are moderate, so much cash down when the goods are delivered, so much in blackmail afterwards. He consults your convenience. His skill may be counted upon. I have seen a shadow on a windy night move more noisily than Knuth, for Knuth is a burglar by trade. Men have been known to stay in country houses, and to send a dealer afterwards to bargain for a piece of tapestry that they saw there, some article of furniture, some picture. This is bad taste. But those whose culture is more elegant invariably send Knuth a night or two after their visit. He has a way with tapestry. You would scarcely notice that the edges had been cut. And often when I see some huge new house full of old furniture and portraits from other ages, I say to myself, these moldering chairs, these full-length ancestors, and carved mahogany are the produce of the incomparable Knuth. It may be urged against my use of the word incomparable that in the burglary business the name of Slith stands paramount and alone, and of this I am not ignorant. But Slith is a classic, and lived long ago, and knew nothing at all of modern competition, besides which, the surprising nature of his doom has possibly cast a glamour upon Slith that exaggerates in our eyes his undoubted merits. It must not be thought that I am a friend of Knuth's. On the contrary, such politics as I have are on the side of property. And he needs no words from me, for his position is almost unique in trade, being among the every few that do not need to advertise. At the time that my story begins, Knuth lived in a roomy house in Belgrave Square. In his inimitable way, he had made friends with the caretaker. The place suited Knuth, and, whenever anyone came to inspect it before purchase, the caretaker used to praise the house in the words that Knuth had suggested. "If it wasn't for the drains," she would say, "it's the finest house in London." And when they pounced on this remark and asked questions about the drains, she would answer them that the drains also were good, but not so good as the house. They did not see Knuth when they went over the rooms, but Knuth was there. Here in a neat black dress on one spring morning came an old woman whose bonnet was lined with red, asking for Mr. Knuth, and with her came her large and awkward son. Miss Agins, the caretaker, glanced up the street, and then she let them in, and left them to wait in the drawing-room amongst furniture all mysterious with sheets. For a long while they waited, and then there was a smell of pipe tobacco, and there was Knuth standing quite close to them. "Lord," said the old woman whose bonnet was lined with red, "you did make me start." And then she saw by his eyes that that was not the way to speak to Mr. Knuth. And at last Knuth spoke, and very nervously the old woman explained that her son was a likely lad, and had been in business already, but wanted to better himself, and she wanted Mr. Knuth to teach him a livelihood. First of all, Knuth wanted to see a business reference, and when he was shown one from a jeweler with whom he happened to be hand in glove, the upshot of it was that he agreed to take young Tonker, for this was the surname of the likely lad, and to make him his apprentice. And the old woman whose bonnet was lined with red went back to her little cottage in the country, and every evening said to her old man, "Tonker, we must fasten the shutters of a night time, for Tommy's a burglar now." The details of the likely lad's apprenticeship I do not propose to give, for those that are in the business know those details already, and those that are in other businesses care only for their own, while men of leisure who have no trade at all would fail to appreciate the gradual degrees by which Tommy Tonker came first to cross bare boards covered with little obstacles in the dark without making any sound, and then to go silently up creaky stairs, and then to open doors and glassly to climb. Let it suffice that the business prospered greatly, while glowing reports of Tommy Tonker's progress were sent from time to time to the old woman whose bonnet was lined with red, in the laborious handwriting of Knuth. Knuth had given up lessons in writing very early, for he seemed to have some prejudice against forgery, and therefore considered writing a waste of time. And then there came the transaction with Lord Castlenorman at his Surrey residence. Knuth selected a Saturday night, for it chanced that Saturday was observed as Sabbath in the family of Lord Castlenorman, and by 11 o'clock the whole house was quiet. 5 minutes before midnight Tommy Tonker, instructed by Mr. Knuth, who waited outside, came away with 1 pocketful of rings and shirt studs. It was quite a light pocketful, but the jewelers in Paris could not match it without sending specially to Africa, so that Lord Castlenorman had to borrow bone shirt studs. Not even rumour whispered the name of Knuth. Were I to say that this turned his head, there are those to whom the assertion would give pain, for his associates hold that his astute judgment was unaffected by circumstance. I will say, therefore, that it spurred his genius to plan what no burglar had ever planned before. It was nothing less than to burgle the house of the Knowles, and this that abstemious man unfolded to Tonker over a cup of tea. Had Tonker not been nearly insane with pride over their recent transaction, and had he not been blinded by a veneration for Knuth, he would have, but I cry over spilt milk. He expostulated respectfully. He said he would rather not go. He said it was not fair. He allowed himself to argue, and in the end, one windy October morning, with a menace in the air, found him and Knuth drawing near to the dreadful wood. Knuth, by weighing little emeralds against pieces of common rock, had ascertained the probable weight of those house ornaments that the Knowles are believed to possess in the narrow, lofty house wherein they have dwelt from of old. They decided to steal 2 emeralds, and to carry them between them on a cloak. But if they should be too heavy, one must be dropped at once. Knuth warned young Tonker against greed, and explained that the emeralds were worth less than cheese until they were safe away from the dreadful wood. Everything had been planned, and they walked now in silence. No track led up to the sinister gloom of the trees, either of men or cattle. Not even a poacher had been there snaring elves for over 100 years. You did not trespass twice in the dells of the Knowles, and apart from the things that were done there, the trees themselves were a warning, and did not wear the wholesome look of those that we plant ourselves. The nearest village was some miles away, with the backs of all its houses turned to the wood, and without one window at all facing in that direction. They did not speak of it there, and elsewhere it is unheard of. Into this wood stepped Knuth and Tommy Tonker. They had no firearms. Tonker had asked for a pistol, but Knuth replied that the sound of a shot would bring everything down on us, and no more was said about it. Into the wood they went all day, deeper and deeper. They saw the skeleton of some early Georgian poacher nailed to a door in an oak tree. Sometimes they saw a fairy scuttle away from them. Once Tonker stepped heavily on a hard, dry stick, after which they both lay still for 20 minutes. And the sunset flared, full of omens, through the tree trunks, and night fell. And they came by fitful starlight, as Knuth had foreseen, to that lean, high house where the Knowles so secretly dwelt. All was so silent by that unvalued house that the faded courage of Tonker flickered up, but to Knuth's experienced sense it seemed too silent, and all the while there was that look in the sky that was worse than a spoken doom, so that Knuth, as is often the case when men are in doubt, had leisure to fear the worst. Nevertheless, he did not abandon the business, but sent the likely lad with the instruments of his trade by means of the ladder to the old green casement. And the moment that Tonker touched the withered boards, the silence that, though ominous, was earthly, became unearthly like the touch of a ghoul. And Tonker heard his breath offending against that silence, and his heart was like mad drums in a night attack. And a string of one of his sandals went tap on a rung of a ladder, and the leaves of the forest were mute, and the breeze of the night was still. And Tonker prayed that a mouse or a mole might make any noise at all, but not a creature stirred. Even Nuth was still. And then and there, while yet he was undiscovered, the likely lad made up his mind, as he should have done long before, to leave those colossal emeralds where they were, and have nothing further to do with the lean, high house of the Knolls, but to quit this sinister wood in the nick of time, and retire from business at once, and buy a place in the country. Then he descended softly and beckoned to Nuth. But the Knolls had watched him through knavish holes that they bore in trunks of the trees. And the unearthly silence gave way, as it were with a grace, to the rapid screams of Tonker as they picked him up from behind, screams that came faster and faster until they were incoherent. And where they took him it is not good to ask, and what they did with him I shall not say. Nuth looked on for a while from the corner of the house with a mild surprise on his face as he rubbed his chin, for the trick of the holes in the trees was new to him. Then he stole nimbly away through the dreadful wood. And did they catch Nuth, you ask me, gentle reader? Oh no, my child, for such a question is childish. Nobody ever catches Nuth. How one came, as was foretold, to the city of Never. The child that played about the terraces and gardens in sight of the Surrey hills never knew that it was he that should come to the ultimate city, never knew that he should see the underpits, the barbicans and the holy minarets of the mightiest city known. I think of him now as a child with a little red watering can, going about the gardens on a summer's day that lit the warm south country, his imagination delighted with all tales of quite little adventures, and all the while there was reserved for him that feat at which men wonder. Looking in other directions away from the Surrey hills, through all his infancy, he saw that precipice that, wall above wall and mountain above mountain, stands at the edge of the world, and in perpetual twilight, alone with the moon and the sun, holds up the inconceivable city of Never. To tread its streets he was destined, prophecy knew it. He had the magic halter, and a worn old rope it was. An old wayfaring woman had given it to him. It had the power to hold any animal whose race had never known captivity, such as the unicorn, the hippogriff, Pegasus, dragons, and wyverns. But with a lion, giraffe, camel, or horse it was useless. How often have we seen that city of Never, that marvel of the nations, not when it is night in the world, and we can see no further than the stars, not when the sun is shining where we dwell, dazzling our eyes, but when the sun has set on some stormy days, all at once, repentant at evening, and those glittering cliffs reveal themselves which we almost take to be clouds, and it is twilight with us as it is forever with them. Then on their gleaming summits we see those golden domes that overpeer the edges of the world, and seem to dance with dignity and calm in that gentle light of evening that is wonder's native haunt. Then does the city of Never, unvisited and afar, look long at her sister, the world. It had been prophesied that he should come there. They knew it when the pebbles were being made, and before the isles of coral were given unto the sea. And thus the prophecy came unto fulfillment, and passed into history, and so at length to oblivion, out of which I drag it, as it goes floating by, into which I shall one day tumble. The hippogriffs dance before dawn in the upper air. Long before sunrise flashes upon our lawns, they go to glitter in light that has not yet come to the world. And as the dawn works up from the ragged hills, and the stars feel it, they go slanting earthwards, till sunlight touches the tops of the tallest trees, and the hippogriffs alight with a rattle of quills, and fold their wings, and gallop and gambol away, till they come to some prosperous, wealthy, detestable town, and they leap at once from the fields, and soar away from the sight of it, pursued by the horrible smoke of it, until they come again to the pure blue air. He whom prophecy had named from of old to come to the city of Never, went down one midnight with his magic halter, to a lakeside where the hippogriffs alighted at dawn, for the turf was soft there, and they could gallop far before they came to a town, and there he waited hidden near their hoof marks. And the stars paled a little, and grew indistinct, but there was no other sign as yet of the dawn, when there appeared far up in the deeps of the night 2 little saffron specks, then 4 and 5. It was the hippogriffs dancing and twirling around in the sun. Another flock joined them. There were 12 of them now. They danced there, flashing their colors back to the sun. They descended in wide curves slowly. Trees down on earth revealed against the sky, jet black each delicate twig. A star disappeared from a cluster, now another, and dawn came on like music, like a new song. Ducks shot by to the lake from still dark fields of corn. Far voices uttered. A color grew upon water, and still the hippogriffs gloried in the light, reveling up in the sky. But when pigeons stirred on the branches, and the first small bird was abroad, and little coots from the rushes ventured to peer about, then there came down on a sudden with a thunder of feathers the hippogriffs, and as they landed from their celestial heights, all bathed with the day's first sunlight, the man whose destiny it was, as from of old, to come to the city of Never, sprang up and caught the last with the magic halter. It plunged, but could not escape it, for the hippogriffs are of the uncaptured races, and magic has power over the magical. So the man mounted it, and it soared again for the heights whence it had come, as a wounded beast goes home. But when they came to the heights, that venturous rider saw huge and fair to the left of him the destined city of Never, and he beheld the towers of Lel and Lek, Nearid and Akathuma, and the cliffs of Toldenarba, a-glistening in the twilight like an alabaster statue of the evening. Towards them he wrenched the halter, towards Toldenarba and the under pits. The wings of the hippogriff roared as the halter turned him. Of the under pits who shall tell? Their mystery is secret. It is held by some that they are the sources of night, and that darkness pours from them at evening upon the world, while others hint that knowledge of these might undo our civilization. There watched him ceaselessly from the under pits those eyes whose duty it is. From further within and deeper, the bats what dwell there arose when they saw the surprise in the eyes. The sentinels on the bulwarks beheld that stream of bats, and lifted up their spears, as it were for war. Nevertheless, when they perceived that that war for which they watched was not now come upon them, they lowered their spears, and suffered him to enter, and he passed whirring through the earthward gateway. Even so he came, as foretold, to the city of Never, perched upon Toldenarba, and saw late twilight on those pinnacles that know no other light. All the domes were of copper, but the spires on their summits were gold. Little steps of onyx ran all this way and that. With cobbled agates were its streets a-glory. Through small square panes of rose quartz the citizens looked from their houses. To them, as they looked abroad, the world far off seemed happy. Clad though that city was in one robe always, in twilight, yet was its beauty worthy of even so lovely a wonder. City and twilight were both peerless but for each other. Built of a stone unknown in the world we tread were its bastions, quarried we know not where, but called by the gnomes Avix. It so flashed back to the twilight its glories, color for color, that none can say of them where their boundary is, and which the eternal twilight, and which the city of Never. They are the twin-born children, the fairest daughters of wonder. Time had been there, but not to the domes that were made of copper. The rest he had left untouched, even he, the destroyer of cities, by what bribe I know not averted. Nevertheless, they often wept in never for change and passing away, mourning catastrophes in other worlds, and they built temples sometimes to ruined stars that had fallen flaming down from the Milky Way, giving them worship still, when by us long since forgotten. Other temples they have, who knows to what divinities? And he that was destined alone of men to come to the city of Never was well content to behold it, as he trotted down its agate street, with the wings of his hippogriff furled, seeing at either side of him marvel on marvel, of which even China is ignorant. Then, as he neared the city's further rampart, by which no inhabitant stirred, and looked in a direction to which no houses faced with any rose-pink windows, he suddenly saw far off, dwarfing the mountains, an even greater city. Whether that city was built upon the twilight, or whether it rose from the coasts of some other world, he did not know. He saw it dominate the city of Never, and strove to reach it. But at this unmeasured home of unknown colossi, the hippogriff shied frantically, and neither the magic halter, nor anything that he did, could make the monster face it. At last, from the city of Never's lonely outskirts, where no inhabitants walked, the rider turned slowly earthward. He knew now why all the windows faced this way. The denizens of the twilight gazed at the world, and not at a greater than them. Then, from the last step of the earthward stairway, like lead, past the underpits, and down the glittering face of Toldenarba, down from the overshadowed glories of the gold-tipped city of Never, and out of perpetual twilight, swooped the man on his winged monster. The wind, that slept at the time, leaped up like a dog at their onrush. It uttered a cry and ran past them. Down on the world it was morning. Night was roaming away, with his cloak trailed behind him, with mists turned over and over as he went. The orb was gray, but it glittered. Lights blinked surprisingly in early windows. Forth over wet, dim fields went cows from their houses. Even in this hour touched the fields again the feet of the hippogriff. And the moment that the man dismounted and took off his magic halter, the hippogriff flew slanting away with a whir, going back to some airy dancing place of his people. And he that surmounted glittering Toldenarba, and came alone of men to the city of Never, has his name and his fame among nations. But he and the people of that twilight city well know two things unguessed by other men. They, that there is another city fairer than theirs, and he, a deed unaccomplished.